if we're conditioned by beauty to see wholeness, and to see harmony, to see uniqueness, which seem to be the patterns in beauty. You're the expert, so I'll turn back to you. But if those are the things we see in beauty and experience in beauty, that also is the way that we develop relationships. We see the whole person. You encounter each other. You encounter some of the dark sides of other people, and you see that that's actually part of their beauty. It's the asymmetry and the symmetry kind of together in one person. So I think being in environments that don't affirm that, whether that's public beauty or not having access to truly beautiful art, I think may be part of why we're so alienated, is we're not conditioned to see these things and value them, and then live based on those values.
I'm Brandon Vaidyanathan, and this is Beauty at Work, the podcast that seeks to expand our understanding of beauty, what it is, how it works, and why it matters for the work we do. This season of the podcast is sponsored by John Templeton Foundation and Templeton Religion Trust. Hey everyone, this is the second half of my conversation with Ron Ivey and Monika Jiang on loneliness and belonging. Please check out the first half if you haven't already. Ron and Monika are both combating the loneliness crisis of our times in different ways. In the first part of our conversation, we talked about systemic factors and cultural differences. In this episode, we'll talk about the impact of new technologies on loneliness, the relationship between alienation and loneliness, and some practical solutions to this crisis. Let's get started. Ron, I want to ask you if you could say a bit about some of the new challenges that you're working on that relate to AI and new technologies and how they shape or maybe prey on our needs, right? Our longings for connection and what have you seen in that space? And maybe the other thing I would also like to ask you about is, which is in relation to this, is there are forms of belonging that are healthy and forms of belonging that are unhealthy, right? And you could look at, maybe a more extreme example would be, the kind of transnational gangs in Central America, MS-13, MS-18, which draw a lot of youth who are isolated and, from their community, they're alienated from their communities. They're looking for respect. They're looking for belonging, and they find in these gangs a source of belonging. And yet that's something that, maybe at a micro and a meso level, they provide that belonging, and then also they cause a lot of social damage. So there are two different things, but I think there's a connection between what you're seeing with some of the ways in which various AI firms are trying to capitalize on this loneliness crisis and the kind of unhealthy modes of belonging they might generate.
Well, maybe I start with kind of the unhealthy, healthy, and then go to the AI. I'd say what's nice about kind of situating the belonging work, the trust and belonging work inside the Human Flourishing Program is this larger frame of, questions about the good life, questions about how we flourish, questions about well-being. People have different language, even within our own, even within the English culture, we have different ways of talking about that concept of the good life. But having that kind of orientation of, okay, what types of belonging and social connection actually move me in a direction of, greater physical health and mental health, greater, my own character development, my own sense of virtue, which people use different language around that. But most people, it's kind of ubiquitous. People talk about, I want to be a good person. I want to be a better person. Some people have an aversion to character virtue, which there's good reason for that. There's some, historical reasons for that. But what kind of relationships and community helps me understand truth, understands both the subjective truth about myself and kind of the authenticity of myself, but then also the truth about my world. And that's one of the things that I was really fascinated by in Marcus Corbin's work is this relationship between friendship and truth, and how yes, loneliness is bad for your health. Yes, loneliness is risky for some of these other things, but it's also if we're really chronically lonely, and we see this in solitary confinement, our understanding of the world and our ability to make worlds and perceive worlds, we really need first our family and then our friends and our community and our local community to try to help us understand that. And when you have people that are pulled out of that and don't have community, don't have relationship, don't have family, their perception of what is what is true, and also what is good for themselves and for the larger community starts to degrade. And I think you see that in the political context right now in France. I think there's a high degree of social isolation and loneliness here, and you see the susceptibility to kind of these political dynamics, both on the far left and far right, where you have very charismatic leaders that are calling people into a bigger collective. I mean, this is not a new phenomenon. We've seen this before. And Hannah Arendt wrote about it, in the last century, that when people are really isolated, they're very susceptible to charismatic leaders, whether that's a gang leader or a leader of a political party. We see that in the United States as well. So I'd say that's a dynamic, and then you've got the tech industry, which has to some degree, it's not the only cause of the loneliness epidemic, but it's one driving force in terms of smartphones and social media. They have kind of positive and negative effects, but for a large part of our population, they've had a negative effect in terms of social connectedness. Now you have, one of the most lucrative parts of the AI, B2C, where they're selling directly to consumers, the development of these AI companions that are mimicking human language, human faces, etc. I mean, they'll get more and more sophisticated as the years go by, and are really addressing that need for connection, but through the mimicry of a human being in either a AI form, chatbot form, and there are other robotic forms that are being developed. There's a big debate about it. Monica's facilitated a really good discussion about this. We've been part of other conversations about it as well, and I think we're so early in the game that part of the challenge is just trying to understand what questions should we be asking. How do we know? Again, going back to flourishing or the good life, how do we know if the interactions with these things are helping us become better people, improving our mental health, or becoming a detriment? We really don't have the best frameworks and ways to understand the impact of these things on our lives. So that's the risk. The speed at which they're being launched and developed and deployed before we really understand the impact. I think there's a worry that we're going to have a round two of what we saw with social media and smartphones when a population's already lonely, and so that has implications for people understanding what's true, what's real, etc. Even more intensely when they're not engaging with a real thing, a real person. So that's the bigger kind of existential questions that we're going to have to ask.
Yeah. Could you just say a little bit about what you think might be ways to address this problem? Because certainly the market is there, and there are going to be a lot of firms that are going to be parasitic on these needs of ours. What kinds of solutions do you see?
Well, I mean, I think in the early days of the internet, it was all about user responsibility, and I don't think that's the answer. But I do think there is, a part of that, where individuals are going to have to be intelligent about how to engage with these things. At the next level, I think there's, the product designers, the CEOs themselves. I think there's going to be those inside the industry that are going to be a little bit more enlightened about it and try to understand these questions, and then others that are already demonstrating they really don't care. They just really, it's the primary objective for them is their shareholder returns. And so for that part of the industry, we need the countervailing force of other institutions, civil society, religious community, and then ultimately you need, regulatory frameworks, both at the national and the global level, that address some of the players that are just not interested in human flourishing, good life, well-being, whatever your category is. They really don't care. It's not that some of them, not as they're always malicious, it's just that they just don't see it and they don't value it. Back to my earlier experience with the government, it's just not even in the viewfinder for them. I think it's multiple levels of responsibility that we have to quickly develop muscles that we don't quite have yet.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Ron. How much of the problem of loneliness do you think is a problem of alienation, right? And whether it's alienation from each other, alienation from ourselves, right? From that ability to to get in touch with what really matters, to even face our existential questions. Alienation from nature, Ron. I mean, you were talking about the beautiful mountains that you were,
Yeah.
that you encountered, and I think it'd be hard to be lonely in the sort of negative sense in which we mean it, alienated, right? Perhaps when we're in deep connection with nature. And then maybe, the fourth factor could be something like a transcendent higher power, God, something like that, right? That a sense of connection to the universe, as some people might call it. But it seems like at least those four components of self, other, nature, and a transcendent source or power are important for us to connect to. And whether or not we're physically alone, we could be alienated from any of those. And I wonder how much that's getting at the heart of the problem here, or whether there's something else.
No, I think that's it. I mean, when you first sent out the questions, that was one of the first words that came to my mind, was this word of alienation. I've been one of the thinkers that's really formed me over the last few years is a psychiatrist, Ian McGilchrist, who was a literature professor at Oxford and then became a psychiatrist and studied the left and right hemispheres. I won't go into all that, but I'd say what I've really learned from him is that, and then also his kind of reflections on a philosopher, Max Scheler, is that our ability to perceive what's valuable in those relationships, our ability to perceive the value of the sacred, the value of the other, the value of the beautiful, which I love your whole framing of everything around beauty. Those, nature, etc., those things are all values that I think have gotten subsumed into utilitarianism and utility, pleasure, my individual use cases, whatever that is. And so I'd say that's, for me, when I'm looking across all of this, I see loneliness is totally interconnected to our alienation from those other things. And I do think one of the things I'd be excited to talk to you all about is this beauty. What's the role of beauty in addressing loneliness? I think part of what I've struggled with within the loneliness community, research community, that sounds like an oxymoron, but there's sometimes we get a little bit too focused on the kind of instrumental ways to solve this problem. And it's really how we got here in the first place. So is the transcendent, whether that's beauty or something else, is that really one of the pathways we need to be giving more serious thought to? That's, I'm really interested in how those things connect, because I think just looking at McGilchrist's work, if we're conditioned by beauty to see wholeness, and to see harmony, to see uniqueness, which seem to be the patterns in beauty. You're the expert, so I'll turn back to you. But if those are the things we see in beauty and experience in beauty, that also is the way that we develop relationships. We see the whole person. You encounter each other. You encounter some of the dark sides of other people, and you see that that's actually part of their beauty. It's the asymmetry and the symmetry kind of together in one person. So I think being in environments that don't affirm that, whether that's public beauty or not having access to truly beautiful art, I think may be part of why we're so alienated, is we're not conditioned to see these things and value them, and then live based on those values.
Monika, what do you think?
I love what you just said, Ron. I was like so resonant with that. Yeah, it reminds me of awe, like the wonder and awe. And I know that you had like Dahak Keltner on your podcast, Brandon, and I co-hosted an event with Laura Francois, who's the co-founder of the Awe Exchange, and kind of wanted to bridge awe and loneliness. And we didn't really prepare much for this event, and we got together. We're friends, and we became friends. And we noticed, wow, there's so many connections between awe and loneliness. And yes, might awe and like cultivating moments of wonder and awe. And in that, there's a lot of beauty. And I also see beauty in this spectrum, right? Not of just like aesthetically beautiful and perfection and like this is clean and like vanilla, but like the right, the darkness and the shadows and symmetry, asymmetry, everything that you just said, Ron. And there's so much in that of like cultivating those moments of stillness of like looking up to the sky, pausing a moment, zooming really in, right? Like doing basically what children are doing,
Yeah.
right? Just being like, no, I want to like stay here, like look at the ground because there's like a small little worm that is like gently, like slowly walking one into another. Like that what captures my curiosity right now. Okay, let's do that, right? Like, but we as adults, as we grow older, we don't do that because we're so much in the doing all the time. So I think absolutely those moments, right, where we can cultivate a different kind of connection to what's around us, and in that also, I think understanding that we are indeed not separate, right? We are not separate from anything. We don't have to be alienated because we're not on the other side. It's like what our mutual friend, Wakani Hoffman, is saying, right? Who's bringing the Ubuntu philosophy actually into the context of AI at the New Institute in Hamburg. Anyway, she talks, right, about this there is no conception of separateness. There's just oneness. It's like it's we. Everything that I am is what we are, right? There's just a we. There's an interconnectedness. And I think if we come closer to that sense of viewing and understanding us as humans as, small, and find some humility in that, I think that could really help in terms of how we cope with those moments of loneliness as well.
Yeah. What questions do you all have for each other on this? Because you're both working at tackling different aspects of this problem, and also resonant in many ways. But I'd be curious if there are things you want to ask each other.
Yeah. Do you mind if I go first? Switch the order a bit.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Monika, I mean, I think one of the things I've been excited about our conversations and just getting to know you is kind of my question is what's kind of practically working at the community level. And when you see people that you're engaging with that are struggling with loneliness, what are you seeing? How are they finding ways out of loneliness, or staying in that loneliness and finding a way to find peace with it? What are some of those practical pathways you're seeing in your work?
Yeah, I guess one thing that I'm seeing in my work, which is more on a different level, but I do think it's interesting that loneliness seems to be like a natural leveler for people to come together. And I think we need more of those. Like it's like beauty. It's like awe. It's like these kinds of like human experiences that you connect through on an emotional level, but you could also talk about it on a very intellectual level, of course. And everybody, because it's so universal, like everybody knows what it is. And at the same time, there's a whole like space of curiosity of what is it for you and how do you deal with it? So I find that quite interesting that very different people feel, called to connect through that experience almost. And that because of that, there is more of a sense of being vulnerable. So that's maybe not as practical, but it is effective, like spaces that allow us to be soft and hard at the same time. And that first and foremost creates space for listening rather than talking. I've seen that people have such a longing to be really heard because we're so surrounded by lots of messagings and talking and like opinions. So to give people an undivided attention for 3 minutes, right, and really listen to them without interrupting, without wanting to give them advice, just being like, I'm here for you. I hear you, right? I care. I'm coming from a sense of care. I think is very, very powerful. And practicing this skill, right? And then I think doing things together, like activities. So joint activities that feel very light, I guess, right? And also inviting, inclusive, where people have like fun playing almost, like where you're not so much in your mind, where you move, you dance, you singing together. Oh my God, like nobody can sing, doesn't matter. Nobody can dance, doesn't matter, right? Like really involving your body, going out into nature, right? Like being being surrounded by, again, beauty and awe. And then maybe the last part, right? Again, this sense of differences. So learning from each other and people that you wouldn't normally interact with. Much older people, much younger people, people from different class, different part of the city that you would normally not interact with because you are in your bubble. That it helps people to be like, oh, I'm not alone in my loneliness. And also, again, I see a little bit less, or I feel a little bit less of that ego self and take myself as something great and whatever. But I see myself as part of community and something greater.
Yeah, I mean, even the way you did that at our last event that we were together at the House of Beautiful Business with the dance, which is very hard for me to do, but it was great. It was great. But it just created a completely different environment in the room. And I think the next event I was at after that, we didn't dance. It was a bit too serious of a group to do that, but incorporating, poetry, incorporating nature, we had someone help lead a song at the dinner that night. All those things completely changed the dynamic to where people are more connected to each other. So I'm learning from you, Monika, on how to bring these things into events.
No, that's really amazing, Monika. When you say people listening to each other, what does that practically look like? Because one way I've tried to do it is through something like salon dinners, where you have about 10 people at a table, each one shares a story for 2 or 3 minutes, and everyone listens. Which has its strengths and weaknesses as a form, but I'm curious as what the practical form looks like where people are listening to each other that you've built.
So in my events, it really is like a maximum 15-minute practice. So it's quite efficient, which we like. So it's efficient, but it's deep. So you go into pairs. I think one-on-one, right? One-on-one is a way that, again, to that point of attention, giving one person attention, creates a little island of emotional intimacy and safety in a way. And then I usually have people reflect on 2 questions, right? Like the first one would be, tell me about an experience where you felt maybe alienated, alone, lonely, misunderstood, some sense, right? And give them 2.5, 3 minutes to share. So one person starts, ends, the other person starts, ends, and they listen to each other. Like one person always listens, obviously, and the other speaks. And then I shift and basically, okay, second prompt. Now tell me about an experience where you felt connected, right? Where you felt seen and heard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then they do the same. It's the same practice. And just alone to give this space of self-reflection, and you're not having a real dialogue. It's not like, oh yeah, tell me more about that. No, it's just like everything that I want to share in those and can share in those 2.5, 3 minutes, I will share. And you are witnessing me in my self-reflection, right? And you're there for me. You're present for me. And that is very powerful. And also this shift, I guess, from sort of the sense of disconnection and loneliness, and then this sense of connection can be, again, quite powerful in the way that you feel after this practice that is quite short.
Yeah. Amazing. Yeah, thanks. Monika, what question do you have for Ron?
So many. What have you learned for yourself? Because I listen to you and I'm like, oh my gosh, there's such a well of experience and knowledge. And what have you learned, I guess, for yourself as you around this topic of both like loneliness as part of, flourishing and having a good life?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we do kind of have a joke among our, fellow researchers of like, how are you doing? Are you lonely? Are you,
Yes.
But there's the truth to it too. I think there's some threads of all the people that are involved in it, like why they are so interested in it. But I'd say for me personally, this particular season, I've 2 kids under 2. It is a very physically isolating time period. And, I'm also an expat. Our community that we had here that was a French community, a lot of them left and moved to different cities after COVID. So for me, it's been a real, opposite of my experience in DC and in Oklahoma, where I had a very, very rich community experience. I've had a much more isolating experience in the last few years. And one of the things I've learned from the research and from, people like you is the importance of just, being a regular at a coffee shop, going and there's a temptation to like try all the different, coffee shops that are in the neighborhood, and there's quite a few, but just going to the same one every day, or every few days, and developing a relationship with the regulars there, or, just being open to, my son's starting school, so getting to know, his friends' parents and kind of building relationships intentionally there. Are those always the natural friends that I would pick? No, but there's a rhythm of seeing them at the park same time over and over again, and just being intentional about that. So I would say those have been practices that I'm, doing in this particular season that I've been learning from others or learning from the research that, maybe when you don't have kind of a natural, natural community like you have in another season, there are different ways you can engage with community that are not the same, but they help you kind of stay connected and build community.
Mm-hmm. That's great. I wanted to ask you, and this feeds right into the last thing I wanted to ask you, if you could leave our listeners with one tip, one piece of advice when it comes to, I suppose, trying to tackle this sort of loneliness problem in that they might be encountering in their own lives. How can we either better get in touch with what we most deeply long for? How can we overcome the kind of alienation we might feel? If there's one practice you might recommend that our listeners could use.
Yeah, I would go back to the art and nature. One of the things that was kind of fascinating, and it wasn't our team that did it, it was another team at Harvard that researched the impact of listening to classical music versus talking to a Harvard grad student. What would the impact be on loneliness? Now, part of it may be the Harvard grad student, that needs some social skills, but it was interesting that listening to classical music actually decreased the feelings of loneliness. And, I know decreasing the feeling of loneliness is not the end goal, but this, connecting with good literature, listening to good music, whatever your musical taste is, but really good music, going to the galleries, if you're a spiritual person, having a spiritual practice where you're encountering, if you can, beautiful architecture in a spiritual context. All those things develop that sensibility where you're starting to see the whole and see the other and see, see the unique, and starts to condition you to just value relationship in the first place. I think that's probably the first place I would start, is just that inner development of our hearts and of our spiritual capabilities and our kind of sensibility to see beauty is actually, I think, something I'm really believe will be a pathway for individuals to find and just be aware of community. Community is often a gift, and it's often, relationship. If you force it or chase it or try to pursue it, sometimes you don't get it. But if you're kind of developing that awareness, then you see it when it shows up. You see that person when they, that random person you meet at the kid's school or within your high school or within your, university department or whatever. And you're like, oh, I'm attracted to having this conversation with this person. If you're fully conditioned to think about everyone as your pathway to success or your next kind of utilitarian pursuit, then you're not going to see the relationship, so I'd start there, doing that soul work.
Amazing. Thanks, Ron. Monika.
What can I add to that? I guess first, not advice, but just it's important to me to say, right? Like nobody is free, I think, of this experience of feeling lonely sometimes.
Yeah.
And that's really okay. And I think that even though it sounds simple, but accepting that is not easy. But I think this is an important step towards then helping, to see things differently and yourself differently. And the second I do want to say is like, as you're also sitting with it yourself, do reach out to others. I think there's such a notion around self-sufficiency and like, oh, I don't want to be a burden to other people. Like, I don't want to be seen in this way. Like it's awkward. And I don't want to, right, like be a burden for others. And I think that's so wrong. Yes, we should all be a little bit of a burden to each other a little bit, so that the suffering is shared, and we can connect again through each other's experiences that are tough and challenging, and we are all challenged in different ways. So I think having a little bit of faith in others, right, and seeking out and reaching out and being, even if that's bringing discomfort or resistance within you, being the person who is interested first, being the person who asks like, hey, I feel like I would love to continue this conversation, or like we should hang out sometime, or like like initiating something, even if it's small, and do it a couple of times, and taking that as your way to actively pursue and cultivate the relationships that you really need and want.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. Yeah. I think if we stay in that illusion that we don't need others, we shouldn't be a burden, it becomes hard for us to belong to anyone, right? And I think that there's the beauty here is when I recognize that you're someone in need and that my presence can be in some way helpful, then I think that can strengthen that connection between us. But also there's something more beautiful, I think, in recognizing that someone we might think is perfect is actually, in some way broken, and that I have a role in that, in that relationship, right? So there's a beauty in that brokenness, to know, especially that so I think, especially people who we would consider friends are the people who would value that brokenness and their role in that connection. It's amazing. Thank you both. This has been such a rich and
thank you
deep
both.
conversation. Yeah, no, thank you. Well, I wish you well in all of your wonderful endeavors. May your endeavors and your lives flourish. So hope to see you all soon.
Likewise.
In person.
Much.
Thank you, Brandon.
All right.
Good to see you, Monika.
Yeah, good to see you as well. Thank you so much.
All right, folks, that's a wrap for this episode. If you enjoyed the episode, please share it with someone who would find it of interest. Also, please subscribe and leave us a review if you haven't already. Thanks, and see you next time.